Memory. That's the problem. When you're doing everything you can to forget the car crash you made of your life. The no-face guy. Vanished like he was never there. And I know I hit him dead center. Today on the Comic Book Report, the 52 Omnibus from DC Comics. Stick around and check it out. Greetings everyone, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I'm excited to talk about a DC Omnibus I've had my eye on for quite a while. That's right, today we're looking at DC's 52. This was a fantastic weekly released series and a great follow-up to Infinite Crisis, but before we jump into today's review, I just want to say a special thank you to our sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking for comic book collected editions, I highly encourage you to check out their website. You can find a link to the website in this video's description, and if you find something you like, you can even use my discount code at checkout. Just type in The Comic Book Report to save $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's a fantastic way to support this channel. Thank you for considering. Now let's get started with today's Omnibus review. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written by Geoff Johns, Grant Morrison, Greg Rucka, and Mark Waid, with layouts from Keith Giffen. The comics in this volume were illustrated by various creators including Joe Bennett, Chris Batista, Eddie Barrows, and more. The comics in this volume were published by DC Comics beginning in 2006. The volume itself collects 52, issues 1 through 52. And finally, this is an oversized hardcover edition with glossy print paper stock, a glued binding, and a total of 1,216 pages. At this time, I'd like to issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at that oversized hardcover omnibus edition from DC Comics. And right from the jump, I love the cover art they chose for this dust jacket. We have the cape and cowl from Batman, the lasso and sword from Wonder Woman, and of course Superman's iconic cape, kind of left alone on the ground. And in the background of this image, we have a handful of our main heroes throughout the collection. A really evocative image that I think really sells what this event is all about. A beautiful looking book. I love this dust jacket. Really well done. As far as the spine goes, it's pretty simple, but I actually like it as well. It really favors the white and blue kind of color pattern for 52 with some black text. It's just a really clean look. I think it looks really good on the bookcase, frankly. I think it's really well spine designed. Yeah, no real complaints there. Just a really good looking spine from DC. The back cover as well takes that same blue and white kind of look. We get some blurbs about the book, a little picture of Booster Gold on the back. Nothing too much. We get some pricing information, things like that. All pretty straightforward. I think the front cover is definitely the seller for me for this dust jacket, but overall a pretty nice looking dust jacket. And with that in mind, I am going to give one final look here. This time I'll include the interior flaps. I'll try to spread it all out for you so you can get one final look at the dust jacket at a glance. Overall, like I said, I think it was really well designed. No real complaints. I think the front cover is by far the best part of it. As far as the Under the Dust Jacket hardback book itself, I'm afraid this is where DC's maybe cut a bit of corners or is just favoring the older style. I do hope in future reprints of this omnibus, maybe DC will upgrade to actual hardback artwork printed on it. But no, sadly, what we have here is just the basic black hardcover book with kind of the embedded 52 Omnibus title on the front and then on the spine. This was definitely a way DC was releasing hardcover books as old as over 10 years ago probably. I know a lot of the DC New 52 hardcovers had a lot of this initially, but I would have loved to see more detail. I think there's so much gorgeous art in this collection. I'd love to see that stamped on the hardback book itself. But who knows, maybe future printings will have that. And now that we've finished our look at that, I do want to transition to spend a moment looking at the binding for this omnibus. It is a glued binding, and this is a pretty hefty book. The paper stock's pretty nice. It does take a little bit of kind of pushing the pages down to get it to open up. I will say there is a little bit of gutter loss. You'll see that as I flip through the video. I didn't really have any critical moments with this. I think for the most part I was able to spread and read, so I don't really have any complaints, but just wanted to give you a heads up. I do think that the binding held up pretty well, especially with the glued binding. But there you go. And now it's time to make our way into the book proper, and as we open up the 52 Omnibus, we have a title page, publication information, we are given a brief introduction, which I always love seeing, and then we're pretty much off to the races with issue 1 of 52. I will say another note about how this whole Omnibus is set up. We do have sequential issues from 1 to 52, which is quite nice, but one of the things it does bookending these issues is we have some of the extras in between the issues, so it's not uncommon to see a variant cover, maybe some sketches or kind of behind the scene materials between the issues. Rather than having a huge reservoir of it at the back of the book, there are some extras back there, which I will show you when we reach that point, but just wanted to note that. You'll see it as I flip through each issue. There's a little bit of supplemental material sandwiched between the issues. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and jump right into 52. For those that don't know anything about this is set in the DC universe after the events of Infinite Crisis, one of DC's gigantic comic crossover events. My personal favorite DC event I've had the pleasure of reading thus far. Last year, I did actually review the entire Infinite Crisis Omnibus here on the channel. Really loved reading it in omnibus format, getting to read all the tie-ins, things like that. Infinite Crisis itself had a lot of ramifications for the broader DC universe, and we see some of those implications spill out into the events of 52. Without going into too many spoilers on Infinite Crisis, essentially that story ends with the primary DC heroes, those being Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, essentially not picking up their costumes, not fighting crime for about a year. They're sort of MIA, out, like kind of not in the scene anymore. They're still there, but they're just not fighting crime. They're kind of having to deal with their own personal problems. And in that vacuum, other heroes and villains emerge into the DC universe to take center stage, and that's when we have this year away. This is 52. One of my favorite things about this series and how it was set up is that it was really a huge collaboration between all of those writers and illustrators I mentioned earlier, and this comic was basically, each issue was released week to week, and within each issue it all took place within that week of the calendar year, corresponding to our own calendar year. What I mean by that is that issue 1 started in the first week post Infinite Crisis, issue 2 came out the very next week and was week 2 within the DC universe. And we go through 52 weeks of full calendar year, and this comic was released on the stands weekly. And by the time we're done with all 52 issues, we have lived a full year in the DC universe that kind of happened real time. I really love this approach. I love that this is what happened the year that our favorite heroes were away, and I think it was just a great way to showcase some lesser known heroes. I know for me, this had a kind of similar feeling in that way as something on Marvel's side like Annihilation. That was this big cosmic event that it had all of these implications, but it really starred some of these lesser known cosmic heroes. It wasn't like Spider-Man and Captain America and some of the big heroes. No, it was characters like Nova or Star-Lord or Gamora, which at the time were even lesser known. Similarly over here in 52, while it does have some favorite characters, what's given center stage here are characters like The Question, Renee Montoya, Batwoman, Booster Gold, The Elongated Man, Adam Strange, Coriander, or Starfire. We have just so many of these characters. I'll go into more as we go, but these are not maybe your A-list heroes conventionally, and yet they're given center stage here. Really, really like this approach, and I think because of that, we get to see characters in a new light. We definitely get some dimensionality or depth with some of these characters, and I think overall, we really get to see a good scope of the DC universe in general. This was a quality I saw in the Infinite Crisis Omnibus omnibus as well, but I certainly see it carry over in here as well, which is that you get a good vantage point of so many different goings on throughout the globe within the DC universe and even into the galaxy. There are some kind of extraterrestrial adventures that we have throughout this omnibus as well, and the whole cumulative effect is that you really feel like you have a stake and that you're immersed in the DC universe at large. You're not really having your tentpole to one of the flagship characters. No, you have just a collection of these other characters that happen to be going on in the DC universe at this time. Really loved it. I found it to be immensely refreshing, and while I do feel like this is in many ways a direct sequel or epilogue or follow-up to Infinite Crisis, I do think that if you were interested, you could read this as a standalone. It'll fill you in on events that happened to the extent that you probably need to know them, but of course if you've read Infinite Crisis, it will make the payoff of this omnibus that much better. So as far as what we get here, like I mentioned, we have a showcasing of some of these more minor characters in the DC universe. How it's basically approached in this week-to-week format, we're given the week and the day of the week throughout this book that kind of frames it within the issue. And at any given time, we have a juggling of major subplots. We have John Henry Irons, Steel, as one of the main characters, his niece, and them trying to fight Lex Luthor to varying degrees. We have Booster Gold trying to really fill the vacuum of Superman's absence and become the premier hero, especially in Metropolis, and all of his misadventures there. We have Adam Strange, Starfire, and the Animal Man, Buddy Baker, off in space trying to get home. Who else do we have? We have a league of scientists that are kind of in this island trying to do mad scientist kinds of things. We have the Elongated Man grieving the loss of his wife, trying to find her way to bring her back, and getting caught up in all of these weird kind of paranormal, supernatural adventures. We have Vic Sage's The Question, kind of mentoring Renee Montoya, who herself is at a crossroads in her life. We have the emergence of Batwoman. We have so many going on. I'm sure I'm missing characters as I'm just trying to recap here, but essentially these are some of our main prospects. And we just weave in and out of their various subplots, and ultimately it culminates into a very satisfying conclusion. Oh my gosh, I forgot one of the most notable pieces as well. We have Black Adam and the Marvel family. We have Black Adam becoming kind of a true anti-hero and then kind of having a different arc toward the end of this book. But Black Adam is also a very decisive piece of this puzzle. See, I knew when I did this list I was going to forget someone important. Yes, Black Adam is a huge anchoring point and a major subplot here. Anyway, we have all these plots converge toward the end of the series in a way that, again, feels very conclusive and nice and sets up kind of a new status quo for the DC universe, and it really dovetails nicely into the return of Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. And while those characters have very, very minor appearances within this book, if you're here for those characters, I'm afraid you're really going to have to look elsewhere. As far as notable plotlines here I'd like to showcase or discuss in greater detail on this review, and be advised there are so many, I'm not going to capture them all in this video, but a couple standouts for me. I really did love that Black Adam storyline I almost forgot about. Basically, Black Adam kind of becomes his nation's leader and tries to broker sort of a peace through his sort of regime. He's definitely a very, very polarizing figure on the global political landscape. A lot of people don't like the way he's handling things, kind of taking out the trash by his own means. Ultimately, he finds this woman who is challenging him at every turn, and they ultimately fall in love. She's given her own powers and becomes this character known as Isis, and they kind of start their own Black Adam family, similar to the Marvel family. She has a younger brother that Black Adam actually bestows part of his powers on, in the same way that Captain Marvel and Shazam, all that, does it within his Marvel family. I found this whole subplot to be really kind of touching and really cool. If you're a fan of Black Adam, maybe you've seen the film or have seen him pop up throughout DC Comics. This is one of my favorite of his story arcs I've ever read. I also like some of the origin stories we've gotten from him in the past. But here we get to see him in a new light. We get to see his heart really kind of grow. We get to see him love. We get to see him try to be this really benevolent force in the world. And I think that there is some tragedy in how his arc takes place across this book. Ultimately, and this is spoilers, but I did note that at the beginning of this video, ultimately his family gets killed, and he ultimately breaks bad and starts World War III. One of the reasons I bring this up is because within this printing, we do not have the World War III miniseries that ties into the last few issues of 52. I've heard about them in other videos, and I've read about it online. I have not read those issues either, but I will say you could read this by itself and fill in the gaps you need to. I can absolutely see how a miniseries that kind of fills out the world of World War III, that all the stuff Black Adam does at the end of this book, I could see how you could see that expanded and enjoy it. But I will say, without those issues here, I didn't feel like I was missing something. So for people that just want to pick up this omnibus, I think that you're going to be fine. I would love a copy of that. I'd love to read it someday. But for right now, I was pretty happy with what we got. Other subplots I really liked. I love Vic Sage, the Question, kind of mentoring Renee Montoya. Ultimately, you find that he's trying to pass his mantle along to her, having her be her own unique version of the Question, because we find out he's actually dying of cancer. This is kind of a slow burn storyline, but we get a lot of cool character development for both Renee Montoya and honestly for even Vic Sage. I really liked seeing how they handled the Question in this omnibus. We get a lot of cool kind of detective story arcs with the Question. Similarly, we also get some good detective stuff with the Elongated Man, but it's really an interesting thing they do with him. His wife passed away, and this is really him in mourning. He's starting to come unglued, and he gets kind of pulled into this whole plot to essentially resurrect his wife. And this leads Ralph Dibny, the Elongated Man, on this really interesting journey on how to do that. He gets caught up with kind of the paranormal, supernatural side of the DC universe. I thought this was really fascinating and a really cool mix of that character in this side of the DC world, because he's so kind of empirical, logical, detective based. To see him interact with more of that paranormal, mystical side of the DC universe, I thought that that was a really fun juxtaposition. I also really liked the crew in space: Animal Man, Starfire, Adam Strange. They even interacted with Lobo, and this was kind of their journey home after what happened to them at the end of Infinite Crisis, and I actually found their little group also to be quite fun. We also have Booster Gold trying to take the place of Superman now that he's off the scene in Metropolis, but his little kind of friend from the future, Skeets, is kind of giving him incorrect information about history, and he has a really fascinating story arc as well, Booster Gold, throughout this. He looks like he gets killed, what happened to him, and that's kind of another central mystery in this book that is very fun, I will say. And I also really like the storyline that follows John Henry Irons, Steel, and his niece. He basically is trying to instill these kind of heroic, patient values within his niece. His niece just wants power and stuff immediately, and instead of working hard with her uncle, she decides to go to Lex Luthor, who is basically enacting a superhero gene therapy program and giving a ton of people superpowers. He has his own kind of created super team, but we find out he can turn on and off these powers at will, and this whole gimmick is to basically try to give himself superpowers, which is not working successfully. He's basically wanting to be his own Superman. Anyway, very, very fun. The niece gets superpowers and becomes loyal, basically, to Lex Luthor, and they are constantly at odds and fighting. Ultimately, we have Lex Luthor initiate this protocol that basically turns off all the superheroes' powers, and a ton of them die. It's really horrific, and ultimately, he does get his own Superman-like powers, and we have this great face-off of Steel versus Lex Luthor. I'm happy to say that Steel is triumphant, but it is such a fun story arc. I thoroughly enjoyed it. There's even this little runner about Steel becoming actually made of steel rather than having a suit at one point in this book. Anyway, it's just a lot of fun. We have that whole other group of mad scientists that abduct the creator of the Metal Men. Anyway, there's just so much going on. I can't cover all of it. Those were a smattering of my favorites. As you've seen as I flip through, the art style, while it changes slightly throughout, it's visually pretty consistent. I think there's a level of cohesion between these artists that I really appreciated. The art is all very modern, lush, interesting. I think they have a really great sense of action and movement. Panel layouts are in some ways pretty standard with the squares and rectangles, and every so often we get great splash or spread pages. It reads very nicely. I will say for a 52 issue book, this is an easy speed read because it's so much fun, and because you alternate points of view, characters, and settings so often, you just go along at a swift pace. I don't feel like I got bogged down in any storyline for too long. I'd get a couple pages here here just enough to satisfy me with a scene or two, and then we were moving on to the next point of view character. I think it was really a great way to construct this. I think the art absolutely helped with the immersion, whether it was on different places throughout the Earth or in deep space. I think all these artists did a tremendous job realizing the DC universe in which we are so embedded as we read 52. When I think about how this book was created with all of the different collaborators, I'm really just impressed. I think that all of the writers in particular are some heavy hitters, some of my favorite in the industry. We talked about Morrison and Geoff Johns and Greg Rucka and so many more. And I'm just so impressed at the way they collaborated, and I'm not always sure to which extent they divided this workload or if they kind of did this all together in like a writer's room. But however it happens, we get a very, very singular effect here. I feel like there is one kind of commanding voice and kind of design to the layout. I think I'm just really amazed at how well DC and editorial here was able to pull off this weekly series. I think it's just about flawless and so immensely enjoyable. I do think that there is, while it can be read for new readers without needing a ton of backstory, there's a little bit of a barrier to entry. Just again, trying to read Infinite Crisis if you can, but also just having some passing knowledge of these characters, I think will help you avoid the initial confusion. But once you get sort of the foundation of this book, it's really easy to let the stories build and give you the character development you need in and of itself. I will say I was really surprised to see how Renee Montoya became the Question in this book. Seeing Kate Kane kind of get the Batwoman mantle and really start functioning like that, I thought was interesting as well. This was a great way to get more of Booster Gold. I will say that I think I had hoped for a little bit more from him in this omnibus. There are portions of it where he's basically missing, and I think that he looks really egocentric more than I had hoped, especially after reading Infinite Crisis. I feel like Infinite Crisis painted him to be really kind of the grieving friend who had to take on and become so much more character-wise after the, what happened to Blue Beetle. And I feel like in 52, while we still have lingering effects of that, it's almost like he's trying to be the superhero just for his own ego. And he does get humbled, and there's some good lessons. And I think by the end, we have a really nice picture of Booster Gold. But I think I would have liked to see even more grounding for that character. Maybe I'm in the minority here. We definitely had some great appearances from him, but I think I expected a little bit more. I think a character who did get kind of like the better character arc in this book was definitely Black Adam. I've always been a pretty good fan of his, but I think that this was, again, one of my favorite showings for him. To start with him as kind of an anti-hero / reluctant world political leader and kind of peacemaker, to see that arc ultimately become this sort of family man, benevolent force, only to have him lose all that and become kind of the world's aggressor and kicking off this world war. I think we get a truly significant arc for that character, and I really was here for the ride. I honestly think it was really earned as well. It doesn't feel disingenuous or gimmicky. You really start to see him slowly become better, see him slowly opening his heart, finding his bride, having a brother of sorts, only to have them ripped away from him in such a horrendous manner. I think that this was really his moment to shine in this book. I think John Henry Irons' Steel, while he's always really morally centered and there, we get to see him having his doubts or his own struggles, or really trying to determine or define what his heroism really means. When confronted by ideals from the newer generation like his niece and that super team. And I think that we really got some good showings there. Overall, there's just so much to like here. I could just keep talking about it, but I want to give you this kind of review. Like I said, a couple spoilers, but overall just a review of this book so that you can get a feel for what's here, and so that you can hopefully get this book and enjoy it for yourself, to go deeper, to really mine it and just enjoy. I think for me, not only serving as its own fun series in its own right, I do like that this is a response to everything that happened in Infinite Crisis. I know I really enjoyed that omnibus when I read it last year. It really made me feel so in touch with the DC universe in a way that so few books do, and I really feel like this is a great logical extension of that. And in some ways, I feel like it's even more, because we have even less of the main top-tier Justice League characters present in this book. Because of that, I feel like you're really left to kind of scramble to get some of the fringes of this world. The secondary characters are all elevated. We get so much more depth from them. We get so much more of the settings and environments in this world, and we're really left to see what happens when the Justice League is kind of not here anymore. What happens with this world that is so defined by these iconic heroes, doesn't have some of their main people anymore. And I think because this isn't like a flagship Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman kind of book, you're here for the world, and I think that it really delivers on that promise. If you're a fan of the DC Universe in general, I think that this is a must-read kind of milestone or benchmark event that really should be experienced, because I know for me, who was already a fan of the DC Universe, I feel like I have an even greater appreciation for kind of the inner workings of it after reading this omnibus. I know for me, it even has me wanting to pursue some of these other characters and try to read more from them. While it wasn't my favorite incarnation of Booster Gold, it makes me want to read more Booster stories. I really want to read more about Adam Strange, even more about Animal Man, even more about some of the Titans that were affected after what happened to Connor in Infinite Crisis. There's so much here, and I think it's just such great narrative ground. I really think it should be experienced by DC fans. I really do appreciate the way that DC sometimes makes events like this, that you get so immersed in the world. I actually hope that Marvel has analogs like this. If you have any that you can think of at Marvel Comics that gives you an appreciation for the Marvel Universe in general, I'd love those recommendations. I do think Annihilation does that for the cosmic side of the Marvel Universe, but what about the mainstream, just terrestrial New York side of the universe? What's an event or a series that gives you a scope for the Marvel Universe in a way that you feel immersed in these characters, these environments? Let me know if you have any of those. As far as extras with this book goes, like I mentioned, they're sandwiched between issues throughout the book, but there's also a healthy collection here at the end. We have cover art, production images, a couple behind the scenes, pencil sketches, kind of things like that. I would have loved to see even more extras, but I'm happy with what we got. And believe it or not, we've already basically reached the end of this book here, and I think that all that's left to do now for this review is to give the 52 Omnibus from DC Comics a grade. For an unbelievably successful weekly series that culminates in such a satisfying conclusion, the Comic Book Report is happy to give the 52 Omnibus a B. This was one of my favorite DC Comics titles that I've read recently. I do think that I prefer events like Infinite Crisis quite a bit more, but this is such a great follow-up to that. It's a great showcasing of some of these lesser-known characters, and if you're a fan of the DC Universe as a whole, you might owe it to yourself to read this series if you haven't had the opportunity to. I can think of few titles that better immerse me in this world, or really give me that sense of depth that the DC Universe can have than a book like this. But who knows? Maybe you felt a little bit differently. Regardless, let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to leave your like, comment, and maybe check out one of my other videos on your way out. Have a good one.